Hello, and welcome to Movie Marathon Mood, the show where we watch a bunch of movies and then talk about them. It's as simple as that. And on this episode, Timothy Dalton comes and goes in spectacular fashion with his only two films, The Living Daylights and License to Kill. Following that, Pierce Brosnan enters the scene in the first post Cold War era Bond and fan favorite, Goldeneye. And it's all right here on Movie Marathon Mood.
The name that means excitement is back. Bond. James Bond.
That girl must be very talented.
Shut up.
Believe me, my interest in her is purely professional.
What is this?
I've had a few optional extras installed.
Wherever he goes, adventure follows.
Two of our men are dead. Koskov's named you.
Then I must die. Eliminate him.
He lives for danger. He lives for the moment. He lives on the edge.
Whoever she was, I must have scared the living daylights out of her.
The living daylights.
All right, and we're back here with our James Bond marathon. Here joined again with my friend Drew Cordell. I'm Jesse Gilstrap. Drew, I think it's good we could just go ahead and dive right in because we got quite a roster for this episode. Really interesting sandwich of sorts of James Bond movies. Living Daylights. So we start off with Timothy Dalton, and Dalton had originally been in discussion back on Her Majesty's Secret Service, but he thought he was too young for the part at the time, which I think says a lot about what Dalton thought of the character. He thought he was too young back then, and obviously who they got at the time was a younger actor, the youngest person who was ever cast as James Bond. But when you see what Dalton did with the character, it's like, yeah, that guy wouldn't be a young guy.
Right.
So it makes sense in a way. Like, oh, that would be Dalton's spin on the character. He's often noted to be like a more serious Bond, which isn't untrue, but I think it kind of undersells the fun of these movies at the same time.
Right.
I don't think he's like deadly serious. There's fun to be had.
Definitely.
I didn't read the whole review, but I read like a pull quote from Roger Ebert's review for The Living Daylights, where it says, "Without a great Bond girl, a great villain, or a hero with a sense of humor, The Living Daylights belong somewhere in the lower rung of the Bond ladder. But there are some nice stunts." That's that's the Roger Ebert's review. Obviously, like, I love Roger Ebert. I'm not just trashing on him, but I think it's interesting that that's what his. He gave it 2 out of 4 stars. He wasn't a big fan of it, and I'm thinking that's a breath of fresh air after A View to a Kill,
Right.
to say the least. But obviously, that doesn't mean that that's his direct comparison point. He comparing it to the whole legacy of Bond to that point, which is a couple decades of Bond movies.
Right.
But nonetheless, I don't know. What do you think just right off the bat in terms of tone for what The Living Daylights does? It's not like deadly serious.
No, it's not. It's honestly, to me, it's what John Glenn has been trying to do since, he came on board as director for Your Eyes Only. Kind of be that perfect blend of fun and adventure, but it not being too ridiculous, having some seriousness to it. And, like you said, the impression that a lot of people have had with Dalton was that he was too serious, and I don't agree with that. But he took the character a lot more seriously than Roger Moore, which is not to say that bad about Roger Moore. I've spoken that I like his take on the character, but it was definitely more tongue in cheek with him with just about everything. Not to say that there was never moments of some seriousness, but he took, especially toward the end, everything was a lot more light, especially the fact you were having to try to accept the fact that this mid 50s man was actually someone like in his 20s or 30s, which was completely unbelievable, more unbelievable than the plot of Moonraker. And I think a lot of what John Glenn was wanting to do, and maybe the producers as a whole, maybe it wouldn't have been possible with Roger Moore. I would, or maybe not at that time. I'm not sure because Roger Moore, always did what they asked. But I also think that maybe the producers didn't know what they wanted with Roger either. And when Dalton comes in and he's new and he's fresh and he doesn't have this legacy that he's already made as the character, they can kind of do things a little more freely. They don't have this other reputation. They couldn't just change Roger Moore into a darker, Bond like that in another movie. They would have to build to, and I don't think that was something they wanted to do. So they kind of kept things more light with him always. And with Dalton, they were able to. The funniest thing is, I don't even think Living Daylights is that dark. There are dark elements to it. It's definitely got a little bit more intrigue and kind of brutal espionage plot points. The opening scene is a fun, but also kind of intense pre-title sequence. You have another something we saw in Never Say Never Again, which is a pre-title sequence or a sequence that's actually a training mission. But the twist here is that someone is there to kill a double O agent. It ends up being more than a training mission, and I love that twist. I love that feel. It allows Dalton to instantly pop on the screen and kind of have like this fun action sequence to start off with. And you can tell he's not gonna just shrug it off like Connery. He's not gonna just kind of wink at the camera like Moore. He kind of struggled with it. He's a scrapper. He's a little more resourceful, but he still had kind of a suave take on him too. Because when he lands with the beautiful girl on the yacht at the beginning, right before the song, he's kind of got that too. So I think he's a good blend of serious and fun. And again, before I get carried away, this is John Glenn's best movie of the ones he did, of the ones he directed, for sure. I think it's a perfect blend of that fun and seriousness that he's wanted to do from the beginning of his tenure, and he was finally able to do it. And Dalton was like the perfect Bond for him to do that with, because he could take that serious take and run with it, but also, have, to me, this one, we talked about Indiana Jones having an effect on Bond a little bit, but it was like they didn't know exactly how to make an adventure movie like that. It's like they had the elements of it, and it's all like an Octopussy. We talked about, that sequence with the hunt, all this stuff happening at once, but the pacing of the movie didn't fit that. This one to me is kind of a rush beginning to end. It's really well done. The sequences are great, and the storyline is really well done. There's not a lot of dragging it out. The adventure is top notch. There's so many awesome set pieces, whether it's the car chase in the snow, which, the thing I loved about this is it's stuff we've seen before, but not, because I've talked about usually when there's snow, it's the Honor Majesty Secret Service stuff redone. And it's still fun, but it's usually that. This time it was something new and fresh. We've seen desert stuff with Bond, not like this. We've seen airplane stuff with Bond, not like this air carrier scene. There was a lot to love about this one. There was a lot to love.
Yeah, I definitely think that there is a great balance in this movie. To say the least, I think it's John Glenn's best movie, and he's the director who directed the most Bond movies of any other director, which is interesting that he did. It just speaks somewhat to this period in time, I guess. But it also says something that while this definitely is a change of pace, it's still John Glenn directing. So clearly, you got the same people, a lot of the same people behind the scenes
Right.
running the show. So to say that it's a drastic change or anything else, it's definitely not. It's still James Bond in this particular era of Bond. Sometimes too much is made to kind of separate the Dalton movies, and they're definitely of a piece with what we've seen. While at the same time, I'm not going to say that they aren't distinct in their own way too. I'll agree with Roger Ebert. There's some great stunts in this movie. I'll agree with him on that front. At the very least, that's something that share in spirit. I I have a lot of fun with the story in this movie too, though. Like I mean, right from the start though, like there's so much. I'm just thinking about the humor in the movie of the cello and sticking the uh, General Koskov in the pipe.
Right.
You're like, oh, you'll be fine. You know, the humor that's done with that sequence is terrific, and that's like I said right from the start. Dalton is immediately and obviously Bond. I think, although I will say, I mean, I mentioned before some alternate history moments, and I won't stop. Even in this episode, there's more alternate history to discuss from what could have happened. But Christopher Reeve was actually offered the part of Bond right at this moment in time. And what an interesting thought that is, too. Christopher Reeve as Bond. I don't know what that would have looked like, but I do love Christopher Reeve.
Wow.
And yet at the same time, it's like it's easy to just picture him as the Boy Scout, and that's not exactly Bond, you know. But that's not to say that Christopher Reeve couldn't have done it. It's just that it's so easy to picture him because he's the perfect Superman.
Right.
So how could he be James Bond? That's a different speed. That's an interesting thought to say the least, in terms of where this could have gone. And they get Dalton, who has uh, he doesn't really have the wink at the camera bit, like you said. He's not that type of Bond, but he is, I think, a good version of the character. I enjoy the kind of balance in this movie of the different characters. I'm interested to hear what you think too of the villains and so forth, because I know we had a little bit of texting about this. Personally, I like the villains in this movie. I really like the way that they play off General Koskov, and weirdly enough, it reminds me of some of Goldeneye, just in terms of, especially because we're watching them in this episode, but some of the kind of turn of face sort of moments. But I like the way that that character is played in this movie, to kind of, I don't know, smarminess, self assuredness that doesn't really go his way very often.
No.
I kind of enjoy the way that that plays off. What's your take here on the villain of the story?
Well, this is one of the things I said in the text was that if the villains had been just a little better, and I'm not going to spoil the rest of the text because I'm not going to give away my rating yet, because I'll save that. But that was not to say that they were bad. Uh, in fact, in comparison to what we've had to deal with, that's kind of a rude way to put it, I guess. But what we've had in the later Roger Moore movies, which they weren't awful.
Yeah, what they forced us to watch, what the villains that they forced us to participate with. Yeah.
And now I'm just thinking about Christopher Walken shooting audiences and laughing maniacally. But no, these are actually characters, and I do appreciate that. It's fun to watch the revelation, which isn't really a surprise, but he's kind of he's comical. He's funny. He's actually a person that thinks he's charming, which those are a lot funnier than the ones who are sometimes because they're not. That's what's funny. And it is charming in his performance, but the character is not. And he tries to pull off this coup and manipulate parties against each other. Ultimately, he likes to just kind of cling to whoever's standing, which is which is pretty funny in and of itself. Then you have his henchman who is also in Die Hard as Carl's brother that has the shoes that are too small for Bruce Willis in a great one of the greatest action films of all time. But he's a
Yeah.
pretty cool henchman in this movie. Very very cunning, almost like a foil for a double O agent. For Bond, he's very smooth, very accurate killer. You get a lot of cool action scenes that focus on him. The mansion toward the beginning when things start to go awry, when he's kind of taking everybody out. It's a pretty fun trip.
And this is also the Joe Don Baker episode.
Yes, I was right getting right to it. Joe Don Baker is Whitaker, which is an interesting character too, being an arms dealer and being obsessed with Napoleon, obsessed with war in and of itself. The charisma of Joe Don Baker, which we will see again in a different light this episode, but he was interesting. I feel like I liked the plot, but I felt like if it were streamlined just a little bit more to where those things kind of came together a little more smoothly, and there was just something to kind of push it just a little bit further, this would be a perfect Bond movie. As it is, it's a lot of fun, and I can't knock it too bad. I like the Bond girl in this, and I was about to say this. This is what I was wanting to say about Dalton. To me, he is the most, maybe until Craig, but it's not that he's the most serious. To me, he's the most caring Bond. He's the most compassionate, and you see that with this storyline with this girl, and it's not about her being pretty. It's not about her being someone he wants to sleep with. He sees her being strung along in this, fake assassination attempt. He could tell right from the get go she doesn't know what she's doing, and he shoots her rifle instead of killing her. And he's talking about her as he drives away. We get him saying the title in his little exchange there, and that's where some of his humor comes in too. He has a sense of humor, but you can tell he cares. And I think that made this relationship work. And I don't know why she was a bad Bond girl. She was smart, a lot better than some of the previous ones we've seen, especially during the Roger Moore era.
Yeah, some of the Bond girls that they forced us to watch. Yeah.
Exactly, especially the last one. Stacy is terrible. She is the worst Bond girl in my opinion. Well, that might be jumping. It's close. She's one of the worst. Good Night's pretty bad too, and there's some more bad ones too that we haven't gotten to yet. But no, she's really good in this, and I liked their relationship. I believed it.
Well, I could say too, just to add to that, that Miriam Diablos, that she might be the cutest Bond girl.
I can agree with that.
Like they have like the sweetest relationship.
Yeah,
There's something that's genuine in it, but also something that's like, I don't know, you could almost imagine them being not in a Bond movie, but in like a romantic comedy or something. Like I could, and I don't think the movie ruins itself in terms of tone. It almost sounds like it could have ruined itself in terms of tone, if I by saying romantic comedy. But what I mean is like that in a Ferris wheel scene, that's just a sweet little kind of moment, and it's something that could exist in a very different kind of movie. but and I think you hit on something just by saying, well, you were talking about Koskov as like a character, and I think that's one of the biggest differences in this movie is that these characters feel like they're more three dimensional.
Right.
They actually have some aspects to them that not that this is like a dense drama version of Bond, but I believe these characters and I appreciate the way that they play out.
And I completely agree with that too. And I wanted to add that we've got John Rice Davies in this.
Speaking of Indiana Jones,
Right, right. And he's fun in this. I'd forgotten about him being in it. And like I said, it's been a long time since I've seen this. And again, you already mentioned some similarities in Living Daylights and Goldeneye. There are a lot of similarities in these two movies. I found as I watched Goldeneye actually, last night. One of them is that Pushkin is very similar to Valentine Zukovsky in Goldeneye, and that these Russian characters that have a past with Bond, and there's tension connected to the plot, but also to the characters that Bond has to navigate through. And I really, in this case, I really kind of prefer what we get. Not that what we get in Goldeneye is bad, but in this instance, I really enjoyed the character of Pushkin a little bit more. And maybe it's because of who it is, but honestly, it was a well done subplot that really did kind of tie up things neatly, but also in a way that makes sense to the story and makes sense to the characters for the resolution. And I enjoyed that quite a bit. Kara is a great Bond girl. I don't care what anyone says. And yes, I 100% agree. Cutest, definitely cutest Bond girl. Like she's the one Bond girl that you're like, yeah, I wish, I wish they were together. I wish they actually got together, and that's the one he needs to have like a long relationship with, because you really do kind of fall for her in that movie. She's very sweet, and like I said and you said, Dalton's Bond is into her, and it is not just a piece of the puzzle. The characters enjoy each other. It's just overall, it's a fun movie. And I think in some ways, maybe what I want is for it to just have that like extra bit. Because I'm going to shock the world. I'm actually going to give this a 007 out of 007 because I think what I was kind of wanting from it maybe wasn't necessarily what it was trying to do. And what it does try to do, it completely succeeds at. So I'm going to give this one the highest ranking I can give it. This is a great Bond movie. I can't really knock anything about it. And I didn't mention this is the last John Barry score, and it's great. It's one of the best ones he did.
and he has a cameo in the movie too, as the conductor.
Yeah, yeah. At the end, yeah, and that's awesome. And I liked his use of synthesizers in this. Kind of like synthesized drum beats and stuff, but with the symphonic score, it just kind of gives it a cool edge. And it sounds 80s, but it doesn't sound dated either. It just kind of gives it a fun, vibrant tone. And then I really enjoy Aha's song. It's not as good as View to a Kill.
No, but it's still a top-notch Bond song. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the only thing in View to a Kill that was a tough act to follow. Everything else in this blows View to a Kill all the way away. This is how you do a good Bond movie, a great Bond movie, and like I said, this is the best one since Spy Who Loved Me. It's just kind of crazy to me that this one isn't more beloved, and that Dalton has this reputation. But the reason he has the reputation is the movie that follows. And I still got to hear your rating. So I'm not jumping to License to Kill, but even that is not necessarily deserved. But you look at this, I think this is like just a blast of a Bond movie. And to me, I'm giving away that I really like Goldeneye too, but I think it's in the same category as that one, which is very beloved. And I don't understand why its reputation isn't as good as it is, but in some ways that makes going back and watching it even sweeter because you see, and you mentioned it, these are kind of the not counting Goldeneye, but the Dalton films are more underrated, under the radar. People didn't care for them that much. So when something like that is good, it's kind of sweeter going back to it. But now I'm definitely not going to let this one kind of get lost in time. Like whenever I watch Bond movies, this is going to be in my, absolute top shelf, top 007. I'm going to watch this one for sure. So, Living Daylights, I absolutely loved. 007. Perfect score.
No, I think that just to be on repeat for a touch, like I really like the characters in this movie. I like the Napoleon complex idea. I really like John Rhys Davis in this movie and the relationship that he has with
Yeah.
a Bond. The kind of Bond having to prove himself kind of thing. Uh, and of course, it's John Rhys Davies, so it's awesome. I really like too the way they use the Mujahideen in this movie.
Yes.
That's like an extra flavor that's used in a way that's like I think it's really cool. The you don't always get that in a Bond movie. He's often in these different cultures, but he's usually just himself
Right.
navigating this world. And in this movie, he's actually in the culture a little more, and trying to navigate the dynamics a little bit. And you mentioned Die Hard, one of the greatest action movies ever. How about throwing True Lies into that mix?
Right.
You know, which is interesting that True Lies came out about a decade after this movie, and Art Malik gets to play a good guy here and plays the villain in True Lies,
Right.
which is just an interesting change of pace that he had to put on. And I would like to mention too, we have like different Felix Leiters every go around until the next movie. Spoiler alert! And this one we get Mr. John Terry, who I think acquits himself just fine, and Caroline Bliss is Dalton's Moneypenny,
Yes.
which is another interesting thing. Not that he doesn't need a Moneypenny, he does, but it's interesting that, and it's fine that they recast, but at the same time, I know I mentioned on the last episode how we lost the Moneypenny we had from the beginning, but it's also something that you brought up that they would always address her age and getting older, but not address more getting older.
Right.
And it's just something that just crossed my mind again, just thinking about them changing money pennies and dispelling of the old one, but keeping the M that they've had for several movies. Robert Brown,
Yeah.
who gets much more to do in the Dalton movies, which you already alluded to in the past.
Yes.
But I think he kind of comes into the part more in these movies. All of that hubbub to build to the point that I honestly thought we were going to at least slightly come to a different rating point, but we're actually at the same rating point. I was going to give it a 007
Yes.
as well. I absolutely love The Living Daylights. I think it's a terrific Bond movie, and I already when we first started, before we ever watched this single one for this series, I mentioned The Living Daylights is one of my favorite Bond movies, or putting it up there in my top seven. And I said that, not obviously I believed it at the time too. I knew that I remembered this movie fondly, but it had been a while since I'd seen it, so it was good to kind of get a refresher and remind myself that, oh yeah, it really is a terrific Bond movie. I will say that one of the reasons I think it's got the reputation that it does to some degree, or doesn't have the reputation that it does, is because these movies they did well at the box office, but they also weren't juggernauts, and for whatever reason, they just didn't hit they didn't hit the zeitgeist in quite the way that they could have. I don't think there's any Bond movie that's not successful at all, which is interesting that there's not a bomb.
Right.
There's not a box office bomb in the mix. And that speaks a lot to the longevity of the series. But these also aren't the biggest success stories either. And as a matter of fact, our next movie, License to Kill, is the least successful Bond movie at the box office.
I want you to know this is nothing personal. It's purely business.
Killing me won't stop anything, Sanchez! See you in hell!
This private vendetta of yours could easily compromise Her Majesty's government.
You're going after Sanchez, aren't you? Are you crazy?
Make a sound, and you're dead.
Your license to kill is revoked. Effective immediately.
Which, to be fair, it came out in 1989, which incredibly stacked summer. Like my first memories, I was 5 years old. I did not see License to Kill, I don't think. Anyway, if I did, I forgot it. But I remember, though, my earliest film-going memory is seeing Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And I remember seeing Tim Burton's Batman in the movie theater. And just thinking about those two movies coming out in the same year, the same summer, like, holy cow. Yeah, that's among the movies that License to Kill was competing with. And on top of that, on top of the competition, it's License to Kill.
Right.
So it didn't have I guess, the best shot in the world. It's also the very first Bond movie to not have I think this, I'm trying to remember, I'm starting to doubt myself a little bit, because Living Daylights is an Ian Fleming title, and it's the last Ian Fleming title that had yet to be used as a title for a Bond movie, and that won't happen again until Casino Royale to have a title. So one of the things that License to Kill has, even though it pulls some elements from Ian Fleming, it actually has its own unique plot. And they never strictly followed an Ian Fleming plot line, or at least not totally, and not for the most part. But they really had to manufacture something for License to Kill. And this is the first thing I'll say about this movie, which is that it really has a different pace, and I don't like it.
Right.
And it's not just that I don't. It's not just. I mean, you kind of mentioned this on Living Daylights. You had to change, shift your expectations to where the movie actually was,
Right.
and that's always a thing. Like I expect this, but I got to meet the movie where it's actually playing. And I want to be clear that, like, I'm not a purist, so I don't need a movie to be any one particular type of thing. But what License to Kill does is it kind of, like, to me, just stalls in the water. Obviously, there's plenty of opening credit sequences that bleed right into the plot, but when this movie goes into its opening credits and comes back to the movie, it's like no momentum right from the start. And I don't know, it's like it's like the story doesn't even know what it wants to do. And that's kind of my first point when it comes to License to Kill, which is unfortunately the last Dalton Bond movie, which we'll talk about more once we get through talking about License to Kill. But what do you think about License to Kill, Drew?
Well, I have seen License to Kill probably as much as some of the better movies of the series, and I don't know why that is, but it's one of those that it's only happened to be on TV when I'm flipping around, and I'll just kind of leave it on because I'll be like, oh, it's License to Kill. I haven't seen this in a while, but in reality, it's probably been like 6 months since I've seen it or whatever. But I've just seen it a lot. But to me, that what you just said is fair because there's a lot of things about this particular film that I feel like it's trying to do, and some of it succeeds at, and some of it doesn't. And the big thing here is that it's trying to be, whereas Previously we've talked about Indiana Jones kind of being the big dog in town, if you will, and trying to capture the feel of that kind of adventure was the name of the game for the 80s era, and I'm not going to say that was their only goal in Living Daylights, but it took them until then to get that right. Well, License to Kill is in the world after Lethal Weapon and Die Hard and Rambo and Arnold action films have hit the scene, and that kind of action is what was dominating the box office at the time. So this was an attempt to make that kind of action movie. I don't know why they chose to make it a revenge film. I think that's part of where this suffers, is because you have to kind of buy into this romance that has never been established between Felix Leiter, and you have a different actor, which in the past has been fine. He's actually the same Felix Leiter from Live and Let Die. The first time up to that point, Leiter has been reprised, but it makes less sense in that it feels like the Dalton era, they were trying to tie things in and have a little continuity. Instead, we go back and we get that lighter, so we're having to buy a different lighter who's getting married. Like you said, we have this opening scene, and it comes back, and we're at the wedding, like after the wedding now, so we haven't jumped time. It's not a disconnected thing. You have to believe that Bond has, which I think Dalton does a good job of making us believe it. It's not his fault. I think the script is kind of weak on that, but Dalton does a good job. But you have to, buy all these things really quick, that he's a lot closer with Leiter than just kind of a colleague. That's where I kind of feel like it's a stretch. Like Felix Leiter has never been like his best friend or anything like that. Just a colleague that respects him. But in this movie, he's his best friend. He's his best man at his wedding. I'm going to get some of the negatives out because there are positives for me anyway. There are a lot of positives for this one. There's just a lot of kind of negative stuff too, and I agree, the pacing, what they're, and then just kind of the tone. It's a tonal mess too, in that it's trying too hard to be something it's not, and they couldn't let it be what they're trying to get it to be, and they knew they couldn't. It still has to be a Bond film, but there's like an uneven balance in that. I do like the idea of Sanchez, who I think is the best part of this movie, because Bond usually is up against a scheming villain who has a higher goal, or someone who's involved with that kind of thing that's just taunting him, like Blofeld, or someone who's playing mind games with him, trying to outdo him, like Goldfinger. It's usually that kind of thing. Whereas Sanchez is this, let's be honest, this is like Bond versus Tony Montana. This is a up and coming drug lord who was self made. He loves loyalty. He's an interesting character. But Robert Davi does a good job playing him.
No, I was just gonna say, like in terms of revenge, I think they do a better job with revenge here than they do in For Your Eyes Only, in the way that Bond is dealing with revenge in relation to the character, the plot line.
Right, and I completely agree with that too. They kind of recovered a little bit, when they actually get to the story. Like you said, is that first like 45 minutes is very meandering and it's all over the place. And like you got Bond hanging out with Sharky, like investigating Sanchez and all his dealings. It doesn't really get interesting until he gets to the island and does that assassination attempt, and everything kind of blows up, and he tries to sell himself as like a mercenary or an assassin for hire to Sanchez to kind of set that up to kind of get in where he can go in for the kill. And I felt like not until then does it really get interesting and kind of find a rhythm that it doesn't necessarily maintain the whole time, but it's definitely a better movie at that point forward. Just getting to that point is kind of a struggle. One scene I did really like before then is when M shows up and they're trying to, bring Bond in. Not that Robert Brown has had a lot to do in these movies, but he's done more in these, in the Dalton ones, than what he had previously. And I feel like this is the most invested he had gotten at that point. I really liked kind of his plea to Bond, his exchange with him, and, kind of coming from a place of a strict superior, but also of somebody that cares for him, that, like, don't do this, don't throw away your career, don't throw away your life for this. I liked Moneypenny being concerned, and I did like this Moneypenny. We talked, you mentioned her. I didn't say anything about her in Living Daylights, but yeah, I feel similar. They had to go and get a younger, prettier Moneypenny, but I kind of like, she's very briefly in this. She was in Living Daylights a lot more, but I kind of like the character. These two films, the characters play more of a role. Their actual character. They're not just there for the the tropes. They're characters. Q is as well. He goes to give Bond some aid, and it could be kind of goofy, and it kind of is in some ways, because we haven't really seen Q and Bond have that relationship before, but I think they both sell it in this movie, and I like that they have that friendship in this, that Q actually cares about 007, cares about Bond, and is looking out for him. Uh, Kind of where this film also lacks is the women. And Pam Bouvier is a cool character. I think, like, she's been involved. She's an informant, was for Leiter, but, like, the romance is kind of just forced. It's not built up to. I mean, again, it's Bond, but even this, it's just like they're arguing. They almost got shot, and then all of a sudden they're making out on a boat. And there's a lot of weird stuff like that. And then the Lupe, she could have been an interesting character. She's an abuse victim of Sanchez, and we see that from the get go. They didn't succeed as well in this as they did in Living Daylights, and everything kind of serving not only the story but the characters. Here, things are just kind of serve the plot a little bit more. But the one thing I do want to talk about in a positive light is that the setup and the action are, up to this point, it's really cool, and it's really good, and it's well done, and it does kind of have a harder edge than the other ones. And that finale is pretty awesome. I really enjoy it. Like you said, the revenge is better. It's a lot better handled. I just wish it belonged to a better movie as a whole. The music is done by Michael Kamen. I was talking about the 80s action. I mean, you're looking at, the grandfather of the 80s action scores. He did Die Hard, he did the Lethal Weapon films. He did a lot of great scores. And he does Bond, and his music's not bad in this, but it doesn't really. It feels more like typical 80s action film than it does Bond, even though there are elements of Bond music in there, but it just feels kind of strung in. Gladys Knight did the song, which is not bad, but it's not great or memorable or catchy either. It's not bad, but that's all about all I can say about it. I kind of already forgotten it. To me, this one kind of falls short, especially you just had a great one, and then go to this one, and there's it makes me kind of mad. This one and Man with the Golden Gun are similar for different reasons, obviously, but, like, there's so much good here, and there's so much potential here for a great movie, and then there's just a lot of stuff that trips it up. And it's a 005 for me out of 007. It could have been better, and I feel like this is the movie that kind of garners a weaker reputation for Dalton, but it's not it's not really befitting the reputation he gets because it's not a bad movie. It's just not necessarily great, obviously, and it's not very balanced. After the last one was the epitome of balance, Living Daylights was so good. There were a lot of things I wanted to love about License to Kill, but it does have some serious hangups for me.
I don't disagree that when it comes to the revenge plot, I think that it plays out well for Bond and in terms of motivating the plot, but where it actually stems from is kind of weird. Right from the jump, that this weird relationship between him and Felix
Right.
that you're having to buy immediately, and on top of that, it's an repeat actor as Felix Leiter,
Yeah.
the same guy who was Felix back in Live and Let Die, which is interesting that they brought back an older Felix. I don't know why they chose to go that route, especially because like I don't know if you're thinking that they're going to have this tight relationship, and not that you couldn't have a tight relationship with someone who's that much older than you, but that's an interesting thing to do between Dalton's Bond and him. And the way that it plays out feels very false to me, you know? And especially once you cut to the end. And obviously, like they even mention, Felix mentions like, oh, he was married once or something, mentions the previous tragedy. But then you cut to the very end of the movie. Bond has gotten revenge for his friend, but then he's talking with Bond, and Felix is like, "Oh, howdy doody," like it's like nothing. He's all in good spirits, like, "Yeah, feeling really good now." And it's like, your wife is dead,
Yeah.
like,
Right.
aren't you still mourning? Like, the fact that you've recovered isn't exactly the point, I wouldn't think at this point. It's a weird immediate turn and a kind of a tonal problem when it comes to actually taking the plot seriously.
Right.
I do like the villain, and I like that we get, Benicio del Toro as well,
Right.
which is just fun to see him here in an early role. We even get Everett McGill, who I know very much from like Twin Peaks
Right.
and stuff. Like he's awesome. I don't know why we have Wayne Newton, but there it is. But I, that's I don't think that License to Kill is the worst of the very worst, but it's very likely to be in my bottom seven of the bunch. I really don't care for it that much either, which, obviously mileage may vary in terms of exactly how bad you do or don't think it is. I can appreciate your response to it as well, because there's definitely some cool 80s action sorts of things in here. And I do have to say that I agree about like the final bit of action and how well that plays off right down to the use of the lighter.
Right.
That's pretty friggin' fantastic way to close the movie. Up until the point that Felix has already forgotten his wife, but like that's all to say that I feel like I'm settled at a 004 because I just think that the movie is just too problematic for me and hard to buy so much of it. Even though there are aspects of it that I like, I wish that they were better. I wish I responded to them more, but that's kind of where I fall with it.
And some of the things popped for me that didn't for you, but even then, like the things that I did like, there's a lot of hang-ups for me. One of the things I think, and I don't know the truth to this because I should have looked it up, but I feel like maybe they wanted to actually kill Felix off and then chose not to do it instead. Because it really feels like that. It's like maybe they, had written a script with him dying and then changed it last minute.
Right.
I don't know the truth to that, but that's what it feels like. That's especially what that scene at the end feels like too, where he's alive and well on the phone and like, oh yeah, that stuff that happened at the beginning, no big deal. And I feel like it would have been a stronger movie had Felix actually died. The revenge would have made more sense. It wouldn't have been as awkwardly wrought out, I think. And then that the way it ended wouldn't have been as awkward either, and that kind of tonal sense would have been settled. What we get here is very, very back and forth in terms of quality. So I definitely can see your 004. I think, I like it a little bit better than that. It is a step down from what we just saw, and it's definitely a step down from what we see next. Because I kind of struggled with how I felt about it when I watched it the other night, and I liked it a little bit better, I think, at first. But when I watched Goldeneye, I realized even more so my problems with License to Kill. So I was a lot more settled with my rating of 005 and thinking about it more because when a movie ends on a high note, and even though we mentioned the awkward thing with Felix, but I feel like the climax, the finale, is pretty satisfying. Sometimes it's easier to be forgiving of a movie when it kind of has that satisfying conclusion, and that was kind of where I was at. But then when I was watching Goldeneye, I was like, oh, this is how a cohesive, well-made story is done.
Right.
And I remembered, thought back to some of the hang-ups I had with License to Kill, and like, well, yeah, it became less of a struggle between 005 and 006 and more 004, 005. I talked about For Your Eyes Only negatively in that it just felt like a Bond movie. They didn't know what to do with it, and ultimately John Glenn's tenure ends with a little bit more of the same. They're similar movies. I actually gave For Your Eyes Only a 004 out of 005.
Yeah, and I gave that one a 005. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're split, different on that, and I'm not going to change my rating on License to Kill because I do think it's a little bit better, but it still suffers from the same problem, and that's just kind of tonal dissonance.
And they're both revenge based too.
Yeah,
It's weird.
yeah,
Uh, Desmond Llewellyn, though, like I do want to harp on that a little more from my own perspective. Is like apparently he said he had never really made money playing Q until this movie,
wow,
which is sad but interesting. Like somebody who'd been a staple of the series for since right at the beginning period,
yeah,
and they're only now not only playing a more significant part, but only then starting to do okay in terms of like, oh, this is actually making me money. Like that's interesting
right,
that it took this for that to happen. So that's a positive take from License to Kill in a way that it did better by him. But also like I enjoy the idea that Q would come out to help him
right,
and would care. Like the fact that his people care about him. That's interesting. But I do think it's funny the moment when Q, I forget the guy that he leaves behind. It's like, oh, I'll come back and relieve you later, and it's like, oh, that guy's dead. You know, like you just know instantly. The setup scenarios in this movie aren't exactly well built
right,
or surprising. But like Q, like, oh, I'll see you later, pal. Like, well, he's dead. And the fact that it's Q say, doing that is just funny in and of itself. While we move ahead, assuming you're ready to move ahead from License to Kill, Dalton was going to do a third movie. So it's not like License to Kill was such a bomb or anything else that they were like, well, we better change pace and go back to Remington Steele, go back to Pierce Brosnan, because he was going to play Bond before Dalton, but couldn't get out of his Remington Steele contract. Before we actually get Brosnan, they were going to make the Property of a Lady, and they even had, I think, a finished script, and they had an advertisement for the movie at the 1990 Cannes Film Festival,
wow,
which I didn't know it had gone all that far, but it had gone all that far. They were ready to launch into production before legal battles stepped in.
oh,
And it was all this stuff between Eon Productions and MGM. There's just some contractual kind of rights issues and so forth that unfortunately happen to infringe sometimes on creative ventures
Right.
and long-standing franchises like Bond. And as it happens, Dalton's contract ran out before they could make a third movie, which makes you wonder, like, oh, what if they had done Property of a Lady and kept John Glenn? Like John Glenn wasn't even gone yet until all this, delay happened, and then John Glenn went ahead and left. So it wasn't like he intended License to Kill to be his swan song as a director, even though, like I said, he had the longest tenure of any director for Bond. So when they were working on Goldeneye, they were actually kind of relaunching it. It's the longest stretch of time we hadn't had a Bond movie in since it had started. Really,
Right.
they were going to bring Dalton back, but the thing is, since its contract had run out, Dalton was wanting to have one more and be done to make his final Bond movie go out with a bang. And they wanted him. They said, "We don't want you back. We don't want you to sign for just one. We want you to sign for multiple Bond movies." And they didn't agree, so we didn't get any more Dalton. I don't know. That's just kind of sad to me in a way. And I say that I like Pierce Brosnan. Things went well, as they say, but it's interesting to think we could have had this Dalton trifecta instead of the two, and it could have made a little bit of difference in terms of Dalton's interesting legacy as the character.
Right.
Two movies, and one of them isn't exactly the most beloved, the other underrated. But nonetheless, I think if he had ended with the third movie and it had been like a hit and had gone well and all that sort of stuff, could have been a different story.
Yeah, it really could have. I've tried to make it clear how I've felt about each Bond as we kind of leave and go to the next, but like and it's clear I liked Dalton, but I always kind of with Dalton, the caveat is I just wish he could have done a little bit more because what we have, again, I think is the most compassionate Bond that we've seen up to the point where we are now, and that in turn is more serious. But he's also there's a warmth to him that's different than Roger Moore or Connery, who can kind of be or can kind of be conceived as cold. The character can be conceived as kind of cold. And it's always funny to me that he's kind of characterized as the meaner Bond, but really he's kind of the most compassionate and sincere. He just happens to act on his feelings more than the others, or at least up to this point. But it would have been nice to see that third Dalton movie and that third Dalton movie be great, and I would have wanted it to be. But where we are and what we have, I feel like Dalton's run is unfortunate in that it is short. It's not the worst run because he has one of the best Bond movies. And ultimately, I think when we get to the end and we talk about who's the best Bond, which I'm sure we will, to me, it's not necessarily going to rely on the films themselves because you know, George Lazenby is in one of the better Bond movies, and I can tell you right now, he's the least of the Bonds.
Absolutely.
It's not necessarily the movies that oh, it's a big part of it, but it's not necessarily that. Dalton has something that even if the movies weren't great, he would still be a good Bond movie. He would still be a good Bond if both the movies weren't that good. But it helps that one of them was great. But certainly, like his take on the character is good, and I think he fits in well with what we've had. He's a different take, but it's a good different to me, and the fact that his legacy is kind of uh, people have come around on him too. We haven't really touched on that. He has kind of gotten since Craig more. I'm not going to say everyone because there are a lot of people that kind of still feel the same way, but more people are looking back at the Dalton films with a little more respect in terms of the series. But still, he's gonna go down in history as the most underrated, I think, and the most overlooked. And it's kind of hard not to when he only had those two movies.
With that being said, and I agree with you about Dalton, we move to the next era.
When the world is the target.
72 hours ago, a secret weapon system was detonated over Savannah.
And the threat is real.
Goldeneye exists. A radiation surge that destroys everything with an electronic circuit.
You can still depend on one man.
I want you to find Goldeneye.
3.
Find who took it.
2.
And stop it.
1.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
The world's most famous secret agent is back.
We aim to please.
And this time, 007 is facing the ultimate enemy. The man who knows him best.
Hello, James. What an unpleasant surprise.
006.
What's the matter? No pithy comeback?
He was your friend, and now he's your enemy, and you will kill him.
Is the satellite in range? Target is London.
Now, the entire world is about to be caught in the crossfire.
See you in hell, James. You first. Kill him.
The pleasure will be all mine.
Did you check her out? Head to toe.
3 clicks, arms the fuse. Don't say it.
The writing's on the wall?
Grow up, 007.
I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War.
No, James. I was always better.
Both of you, stop it! You're like boys with toys. Trick is to quit while you're still ahead.
I wouldn't think of it.
Charming, sophisticated secret agent. Shaken but not disturbed.
Get us out of here!
Bond. Only Bond. Man just won't take a hint.
You don't need the gun.
That depends on your definition of safe sex.
On November 17th, United Artists brings you,
Trust me.
James Bond.
Why can't you just be a good boy and die? That's one trick I've never learned.
We move to the next era, which really feels like a new era for Bond in so many ways. But a big part of that is the fact that, again, it had been 6 years between License to Kill and GoldenEye. They had to get the legal nonsense out of the way and relaunch Bond. And that's what they were really attempting to do, was like, we're going to relaunch this thing, go big. And I mean, it's not the biggest Bond budget, but they did have a bigger budget for GoldenEye than they did for quite a few Bond movies in a row. So they were putting their cards on the table, really trying to make a big kind of statement. And on top of that, on top of being a changing of the guard, it's worth mentioning that Albert Broccoli passed away not long after GoldenEye and wasn't in good health during production either. So he had kind of pushed things more to Barbara Broccoli at that point. And that's already worth kind of bringing up in a way, is the fact that it's Barbara Broccoli now.
Yeah.
Kind of overlooking the franchise. In many ways, it's worth mentioning because you got Next Gen, you got, kind of changing of the guard to a certain degree. Albeit somebody who had obviously been close, still in the family, and it's still someone had been there. But it's also the female producer side of it too, I think, is part of the kind of changing pace and changing tone in some ways. This is definitely like the 90s Bond, female Ilm.
Yes.
That we'll definitely talk about as well. It's, so many things that just kind of feel different, like, and we already mentioned in this episode a Bond girl who wasn't just a floozy or anything else, like somebody who. And throughout this, talking about Bond movies, there's a lot of different types of Bond girls. But here's a Bond girl that's, I think, definitely a different kind of Bond girl who feels more involved with the plot and has her own storyline going along with it too,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
isn't dressed to be the sexy vixen kind of character either. There's all this kind of changing in tone, and that's not the entirety of the movie. The movie is also a celebration of Bond. It's kind of Brosnan has mentioned that he kind of, and it was built in the script too, but he wanted to kind of take on characteristics of Connery and Roger Moore. So on top of that, it's worth mentioning that Brosnan's wife had been in a previous Bond movie with Roger Moore. He had been married to Cassandra Harris back on For Your Eyes Only, and had visited the set without ever thinking, I'm going to be that guy one day.
Right.
He was just kind of in awe of the experience of being on a Bond set as the husband of a Bond girl.
Hmm.
And then he actually became Bond himself. But point is, like, this is a guy who had grown up with the movies and had respect for the series and kind of wanted to have a little mixture of different characteristics, and that ultimately really is emblematic of his tenure as Bond.
Right.
Is kind of a mixture of that serious and the goofiness, and in so many ways, while also continually being suave as well. Goldeneye is, I think we mentioned it at the very beginning of all this. It's a movie that I think we've both grown up with, and on top of that, like, there's the nostalgia kick from watching it. Like, it's a classic in so many ways. And you can't talk about GoldenEye without talking about the very best video game ever adapted from a movie,
Right.
the N64 GoldenEye game. And the thing is, like, I know different people have different relationships with it. Some people, I'm sure, have only played the game and never seen the movie. For me, like, I played the game, I don't know how much, but I've also watched the movie a lot too. So when I watched the movie, absolutely I remember the game and parts of the game. Like, especially when I get to the finale, I'm thinking about trying to shoot Trevelyan
Right.
and that being difficult or whatever. But like, I'm imagining a different version of the movie than what we actually see, in a way, just because of the video game.
Yeah.
But the point is, like, I definitely think of the movie as the movie, and that nostalgia kick is strong all throughout. There's so many classic moments,
Right.
and yeah, it really starts off that way, with the classic opening sequence and that record-breaking bungee jump off the dam. And that's already a great stunt, but I want to bring up a beef right up the top. There's one of the craziest, coolest stunts in movie history when Bond is chasing the plane on a motorcycle and races off a cliff. And when they did the stunt guy did the entire thing for real. Drove off a cliff, jumped off the bike, dived down and caught up with the plane and got inside. And they cut away from that shot in the actual movie to some effect shots of Brosnan, and it's so obvious, and I'm like, "Why wouldn't you stay with that wide master shot of the stunt guy?" That's an incredible feat. Like, you don't have to show you'll get plenty of hero shots throughout the movie, you don't have to show Brosnan's face.
Right.
Stay with the incredible stunt. And I wanna add this thought too to that idea, because this is not an uncommon thing in movies, it's not an uncommon thing in the Bond series. We've seen before, stunt sequences to intercut between effect shots of the actor and back to wide shots of the stunt guys, sort of thing.
Right.
But usually when they do that, it's because it's a long sequence and it's a pacing thing. There's absolutely no excuse for them to cut away from that shot of the guy diving and catching up with the plane. It wouldn't have hurt the pacing whatsoever to just stick with that one shot. So yeah, that's a that's a problem that I have. I mean, that problem is a relatively small problem,
Yeah.
but nonetheless, it's a problem. Yeah, and then of course the movie kicks into the opening theme, and it's amazing, and it's one of the best themes in the series, thanks to Bono, The Edge, and Tina Turner. It's a great theme song and a great opening title sequence. I'm trying to kind of mitigate my thoughts here because there's so much that's positive all throughout the movie and so much that we could talk about. But I also have little problems in the movie too. And just touching on the obvious spoiler here for the movie, which is Alec Trevelyan, 006, and his turn. I will say, like, that's one of the best villains in the series.
Yeah.
And it's amazing what they do right at the top. Like, you don't get to see their relationship for very long, their friendship, but you get just enough to immediately know what that was and what that meant and why it feels like a betrayal later on. And that's great. That's great storytelling and great acting between Sean Bean and Pierce Brosnan. But something I don't understand, and I'm interested to see what your take on just this alone is. But right in the opening sequence, obviously there's the moment where Bond he changes the timer from 6 to 3 minutes on the explosives. That happens, and they pretend to kill Alec right there, but not really. They're trying to trick him,
Right.
but they're also trying to maybe shoot him and kill him, but they're not.
Yeah.
And every time it looks like they have an easy shot at him, or they could just walk around and shoot him
Yeah. Yeah.
while he's sneaking away holding the barrels. They could just walk around. Or when he's racing away in a motorcycle and
Just shoot him in the back.
they're stopped.
Yeah.
They like Colonel Ormov, like he actually says, "No, wait." And I'm like, "Wait, why?" And like I'm trying to logically break this down. On one hand, maybe he knows the relationship genuinely between 006 and 007, and it's like we don't really want to kill him, but that doesn't hold weight because they seem to be actually trying to shoot him at different points. Like they're not really wanting him to get away, are they? But that conflicts with the fact that they have some easy shots at him at other points, and it just blows my mind probably more than it should. And I'm definitely overthinking it, but it bothers me.
Well, kind of what like. It kind of stuck out to me too, but I think where my mind went with it was that he knew that it was like a dead, it was a cliff,
Right.
and him assuming that he's going to just ride his bike over the cliff and jump in the plane probably didn't cross his mind. So I figured, he's just kind of letting it play out and seeing if Bond does something drastic and like goes over the edge, which he probably didn't even think he survived all of that time, or and not wanting to waste any more men, which again doesn't hold too much weight because he just turned around and shot one of his guys when, when he was firing at the gas tanks. And of course, let Trevelyan kill some of his men. So, I mean, that argument doesn't hold much weight either, but it was kind of where I went with it. But yeah, it was kind of a weird thing because I was wondering why there weren't somebody chasing him as well when he was going after the plane.
And why fake Alec's death?
Yeah.
That's the other part of it is why did they fake his death? Just to trick Bond? But they're trying to kill Bond.
But they're trying to kill him, yeah.
So if you don't expect him to get away, why fake the dude's death?
Right.
That's weird. And the only reason is to trick the audience.
Right.
Which I don't like that, but I'm not saying it ruins the movie. It's just a little hiccup, and the movie doesn't stop having those little hiccups for me. Like, and I say little because I do mean little. It's just enough, and I'll spoil the lead here by saying that I give the movie a 006 out of 007, which I think is kind of an appropriate rating for this movie. It's given in a 006. But nonetheless, it comes so close to being a 007 in so many points, but I feel like it just misses the mark for me in terms of completely selling every part of it. And it comes down to just little things like that and logical fallacies, and sometimes maybe that's me overthinking it. Even though there's a lot to love about the movie, and one of the biggest things to love about the movie is the cast. The cast is utterly fantastic all throughout, including, like I already mentioned, Sean Bean, but also mentioning Godfrey John, who's a terrific villainous face to add to the list. Alan Cumming is one of my favorite people, and I love seeing him in here. I love Famke Janssen in this movie. I think she's over the top,
Yes.
but in the best possible way.
Yeah.
And she really eats up the screen every time she's on it. And what's great is how many times like the other villains in the movie will give her a look like, "What the hell is wrong with you?"
Right.
And she's just enjoying being a villain. I like our other Bond girl, the good one, Isabella Scorpco, however exactly you pronounce her name, but Natalia. I think she's a good, kind of genuine Bond girl. Somebody who seems like just a good, decent person. It's a smart person who wins the day in her own right with her own wits. I think that says a lot.
Right.
Robbie Coltrane is awesome.
Yes.
And I just love the dynamic that he has because he kind of puts Bond in his place, and that's kind of a cool thing to see. And speaking of putting Bond in his own place, Judi Dench, who eats up the dialogue in this movie, really comes in and immediately makes her stamp.
Right.
Sexist, misogynist dinosaur stuck in the Cold War. Like that's just fantastic, and it also tells you a lot about what this movie's doing with the character and what this movie's kind of tone is going to be.
Right.
What are some thoughts that you have, Drew, about this new era of Bond?
I want to pick up right where you left off and talk about M real quick. And that, Judi Dench is only in this movie for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, if that. But, we talked about Robert Brown, and we liked him, and, he never really got to do much from what he did do. Got to do a little bit more of, the Dalton films was well done, but what little Judi Dench has, she makes more of an impact than Robert Brown ever did, just in her, couple of scenes. I thought, I already loved Judi Dench's image. It's been a while since I've seen Goldeneye. It's the one of the Brosnan era I've seen the most. I'm looking forward in some ways to watching this next batch. I say in some ways because I know I hate Die Another Day, but the other two I'm really kind of hazy on my memory of. But one thing I know that, in the Brosnan era and the Craig era, that Judi Dench is a great M. But what I didn't remember was that she started off a great M. I remembered that line, the sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War. I remembered it because it's a great line. But her whole stance in the movie, she's a numbers cruncher. People don't appreciate her because she's a woman, and also because she's replacing, a predecessor who we will assume is either Robert Brown or Bernard Lee, however you want to look at it, but an established figurehead as M, and that she's coming in, she's new, she hasn't earned the respect of the all of MI6 probably, and definitely not James Bond. But their little back and forth, their little banner, is something I really enjoyed, and it was believable. And she also showed that, she has an edge to her and that she's willing to, as she says, send someone to their death. But I like how she ended their little exchange. But Bond, please come back alive. To me, there was an emotional connection to that. And I don't know if it's because I've seen what they do with the character later on in the Daniel Craig era or what, but it just hit me differently than it ever has. And it feels like Martin Campbell, who does an excellent job on this movie directing it, was laying the groundwork for what would ultimately be in the Craig era too, because he comes back and paves the way again with Casino Royale, which again we'll touch on much later. But I felt like a lot of other parts of the movie were like that for me. I even liked the little exchange with Moneypenny, which Samantha Bond, Moneypenny, is younger and attractive again, but is also more like the Lois Maxwell branch of what Moneypenny is. She has that edge to her, that sarcasm, that wit and intelligence to match Bond. And I really enjoyed it. There was a weight that came with her brief scene. I really enjoyed all the connections with that. And like you said at the beginning with Alec and Bond, you just get this brief back and forth, the brief banner, but becomes it works the rest of the movie works so well because the brotherhood you kind of sense from just those brief lines and the connection they have. And even when he gets quote unquote killed for whatever reason, we'll leave the logic out of it for now, but when his death is faked, it obviously has an impact on Bond, but he also has to think quickly to get out and survive. And again, you mentioned him being one of the best villains in the series, and I agree wholeheartedly. And he's probably in my top three. He's from the same ilk as Bond, but is also from like that darker side of the tracks, and they make that work very well. And I love, and not just because I'm a former employee of the railroad, but I love that his secret lair is an old army train uh, from Russia that just moves around and they can't track him down. He's been this famous arms dealer, gangster, Russian mafia guy Yanis, for all these years since, and probably prior to what we see at the beginning of Goldeneye, because we time jump 9 years after the Goldeneye. So, and I also want to say I have to apologize to Tina Turner because I used to think this song sucked, but I actually like it now. It's weird because we have heard some bad Bond songs now, but especially just going back and listening to it now, I realize, musically I already kind of liked it, but I don't know, it was never really my thing. But now my taste has changed a little bit since the last time I listened to it, and it is a good song. So Tina, I'm sorry, and I also forgive you for Beyond Thunderdome, but we're not going to get into that.
That could be a future series, yeah.
I would love to do that. I would love to. Back to Goldeneye itself. I just I'm not gonna discount what you said because I agree to a degree of some of the problems you had with it. But for me, a lot of the things that didn't keep from what worked working for me personally. And there is a nostalgia, like you said, that this was like the Brosnan was the Bond of my youth and years too. And like this film is definitely the one I've seen the most out of all of those. And
Right.
to me, Brosnan, like I don't feel like he's in the conversation as much when people talk about best Bond because of I feel like Connery still gets mentioned deservedly, and I'm sure people still mention more also deservedly, but and then it's like they talk about Daniel Craig, which is also deserved, but Brosnan is also deserving to be in the conversation still. And I know, we'll get to how his last movie, but again, like we were talking about, you mentioned it last time, a last movie doesn't necessarily taint a legacy. The movies themselves don't determine the quality of the Bond. To me, Brosnan is like the perfect, and you already mentioned that's what he was going for, but he is like the perfect marriage of Connery and Moore, and he is able to embody those two into his own take, and it is a distinctive. It's not just oh he's doing what they do, just mix and matching. He's doing his own thing, and that he's kind of got a suave, Connor and some of the colder personality traits that Connery had, and the charm and the suave factor, as I already mentioned. But he also has, the wink and smile of Roger Moore, but he's got a lean edge to him as well, and you can attribute that to Dalton too. But I feel like it's even different than that. It's from a different place, and I just really enjoyed watching him in this time around because I do think that Dalton was Bond right from the Living Daylights, but Brosnan was Bond at the high level right from the beginning, almost in the same way that Connery was in Doctor No. You can start off as the character in it, and then you can just be this higher level of it. And I feel like Connery and Brosnan are the only ones that started off at this like super iconic high. And it's crazy for me, to watch it because it feels like Goldeneye. It almost feels like Goldeneye is part of a series that Brosnan starred in all along. And that's how it should feel when a new actor takes over. But it was just very strong in this movie. And I think that's part of what makes it work is him. He's just so good in this. Like you said, the rest of the cast is amazing. The characters are really good too. And you mentioned Barbara Broccoli kind of taking over, and we talked about M, being a female now, and we talked about Natalia being a smart, different kind of Bond girl. Not necessarily the most different because really we in Living Daylights, Kara was similar. It was different, but they were similar types of characters. I wanted to particularly point out someone you've already talked about is Femke Janssen as Xenia Onatop, who, for my money, is in the conversation for best henchman of the series. She's incredible. She is so like over the top, on a top of it, if you will. She's great, and chewing up scenery is what she does, and she's just perfect in this. And when she's just killing all those people at the satellite dish in Russia, that was what Walken did in View to a Kill done right, as far as like, just someone who gets off on hurting other people.
Yep,
And but
exactly.
it felt real. It felt part of this. And we'd seen her do other stuff before that, but that was just kind of the cherry on a top of it. But it's and I won't say it's without its flaws because anything has those, but I feel really strongly about this one. I give it a 007. I do think that this and Living Daylights are probably kind of like on my lower spectrum of the 007 because I don't and I love them, and it's kind of weird to say that, but like I don't put them like where I would put Goldfinger, thinking of like the golden standard. But they're in that ballpark. And Goldeneye to me, if it had smoothed out some of those little kinks, it would be on that golden standard. I mean, it is an iconic Bond movie. It has some great set pieces. And one of the things I wanted to mention real quick is, I've liked to kind of see the different directors and what they do with the character and everything. And we talked about, Lewis Gilbert having the mindset to have like over the top bases on submarines type of stuff, and we liked that kind of thing. I like Martin Campbell's headspace of Bond being a lot more resourceful and not afraid to get his hands dirty in chases. And I like that the chase in this movie is a reversal in that it's actually Bond chasing someone and it's in a tank. And I really enjoyed that sequence. And it has a great use of the original Bond theme. And again, it's something I think that Martin Campbell will bring back. I enjoyed the finale quite a bit too.
The finale's fantastic.
Oh, it's so good. It's one of the best finales in the series, I think. I mean, sure, I don't believe that Trevelyan would have survived the fall to see everything crash on him, but it doesn't make it any less satisfying. And I can also accept certain things in Bond movies that I wouldn't in others. And then, Boris yelling, "I'm invincible" as he gets frozen is also great. There's just so many great things. We didn't talk about Joe Don Baker. I said we're going to talk about him. Well, he's in this movie. Oh, Jack Wade playing a different character. He was Whitaker in Living Daylights. He was a villain. Jack Wade is more of a kind of fill in for Felix Leiter, I guess you could say. He's a CIA type, but he's not Leiter. He's his own character, and I like him in this. He's very likable. He's very Joe Don Baker. He calls James Bond Jimbo.
He's definitely Joe Don Baker.
Yeah, it was like, just be yourself.
Yeah.
I don't think they even gave him a script. I think they just went with it. But I really liked him in it. Robbie Coltrane, we talked about. I like his character. Why is Gina Davis in this movie singing "Stand by Your Man" as a Russian mistress? I don't know, but it's hilarious.
Minnie Driver.
Oh, Minnie Driver. Oh, I feel stupid, but you're right. Yeah, Minnie Driver. That's what I meant. But absolutely. Why is she in it? I don't know, but it's still hilarious. And I've always gotten those two confused, so I'm glad it's on public record now. I don't know why, but I've always gotten those two confused. And I'm not going to defend myself.
That's a funny scene, though.
Yeah, it's hilarious. But yeah, I love the cast of this movie. I wish. I mean, I don't know if it would have, and I don't even know how I feel about Tomorrow Never Dies because it's been so long. I wish that maybe Martin Campbell had done more of the Brosnan era because I feel like his grasp on Bond is maybe a little bit better than others.
Not only that, but like, and obviously we'll have plenty to say in the upcoming episode. But Mark Campbell went on to do Mask of Zorro, and that's a great movie in its own right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to think, like, if he didn't go off and do that, like, what would he have done if he were to do Bond?
Right.
And keep doing Bond with Brosnan.
Maybe we could have gotten an Antonio Banderas Bond villain.
Oh wow, yeah.
Or Anthony Hopkins, just borrow, or the Catherine Zeta-Jones as a Bond girl, just borrowing all those elements from Mask of Zorro, which is a great movie. Martin Campbell, we'll throw Green Lantern out of the picture here, but he's a very interesting director, and he understands the importance of character and can infuse them into action and make the action speak as loudly as dialogue. And I think that's something that not a lot of directors have, and it's really key for Bond to have that talent. And you didn't feel as strongly about as Goldeneye as I did, but I think you agree with me in the fact that the vibrancy of this film and just everything around it kind of catapulted Bond into something that it hadn't been yet, and that it had a lot of potential to do even more with it. And I'm not even going to say in the Brosnan era they do it, but I feel like he was able to pave the way. And again, just out of nowhere. Not that the Dalton movies were terrible, which I were on record saying they weren't, but he comes out and just brings it up to a whole other level of quality after License to Kill. Just something you wouldn't expect, and then he's able to do it again in a even more dramatic fashion with Casino Royale. Just the fact that he lightning struck twice when he directed. I wish he would have directed more Bond films, but that's beside the point. But I think Goldeneye was a good start. I do think it's been a proven track record. I mean, Doctor No isn't not the best Bond movie, but we're going to throw Connery out of the picture because we know he was great. And right out the gate, he was great. But the subsequent Bonds have had pretty good movies to start off their 10 years. Whoever is Bond next has to deliver on that first one. And I don't know if that's the pressure of all these is that they have to at least make that first one really good. But they somehow deliver. And GoldenEye is a great delivery on that. It has a lot going for it. I gush about it a lot. And part of it's the nostalgia kick, but I just really enjoy it. And for me, it is one of my favorite Bond movies. Yeah, and like I said, it's not, I don't pretend it to be as good as Goldfinger or anything like that, but it's just up there and it holds a special place for me in Bond.
It definitely holds a special place in my heart as well. Like I'm definitely fond of the movie, and it's high on the roster. Let's put it that way. And there's plenty of iconography in it that's fantastic. And when I pick on it, I don't want to pick on it too hard. It's not like what a flawed bad movie or anything. It's just little things that knock it back for me. Like the tank chase scene is great,
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah,
And the statue on tank, like everything and how they use it, it's just cool and fun. And then for some reason it just ends and he sneaks up on a tank.
right,
You know what I mean? Like, how did they forget he was chasing them?
right,
First of all, he was just chasing them in a tank. He's hard to miss.
right,
But not only did they forget that he was chasing them, but he sneaks up and peeks at them still in a tank.
right,
That doesn't exactly make sense. Like, and when it comes to like Xenia Onatopp, I freaking love Famke Johnson. Like, she's great in this movie. I don't exactly know what's happening in some of the sequences involving her, and she's crushing people with their legs, but they can't toss her aside or do anything with her. Like, she's just completely unstoppable. Like Bond could just like slug her in the face or something, but it I don't know, like it's fun, but it's like little things that I'm like I could pick on that a bit. For some reason, the romantic scene on the beach always bothered me with Bond and Natalia. Like right after they escape, like I don't exactly know what to think of the tone of that sequence.
I agree that their actual romance was a little underdeveloped, but I really liked their banter.
Especially if you compare it to like the Living Daylights,
Oh
which we
yeah,
just talked about earlier, and then it doesn't make sense on that level.
yeah. The banner they shared was really good, though. I really kind of liked that running gag of every vehicle that they are in together gets destroyed, and her commenting on it a lot, and the back and forth of he means nothing to me, and or she means nothing to me.
Right. There's good dialogue in this movie for sure.
Oh yeah, I feel like the romance was kind of added just to have a Bond romance, which again, it's Bond. Yeah, it's not the worst one by any means. If it had been a little bit better, and I think that's why I kind of changed my mind on Living Daylights too, of giving it a 007 instead of a 006, because I had little things with it that I didn't like. Some things that didn't connect the dots for me, I guess, as far as like the connection with Koskov and Whitaker. Like I understood things why they were away, but I didn't get like the glue that made that stick, I guess. But what the movie does and what it accomplishes and the fun of it. I just it's good. It kind of like the same with Goldeneye. Is that romance? It's probably like the weakest point of the movie to me. That's the part that I probably had the biggest issue with. I really liked their conversation in the bed or on the beach. I like the conversation on the beach. I don't necessarily like that it was a love scene.
Yeah, that's where the tone thing gets in my way.
Right. But again, like right after that, it's followed by one of the greatest finales of the Bond series.
Absolutely.
So, I and like you love it too. 006 is a great score to give it. So it's not like one of us is giving it thumbs up, one of us giving it thumbs down. We both really like it. It's a little higher for me, but I definitely see you point and agree to it,
Right.
to a degree because there are issues tonally with it.
I'm gonna pick on one more thing,
Okay.
and I don't want to make this just. I want to pick on GoldenEye episode, but uh, the score. I'm not a big fan of the score, and I don't know what you think of Eric Serra's score, but it's not my favorite Bond score.
And I'm not either.
Yeah, it has some positives. Yeah,
It's very hit and miss. I like the more symphonic stuff and the stuff that used more strings, especially kind of toward the end during the finale, kind of the very driven stuff while Bond and Trevelyan are going after each other. I like those bits, but kind of and Eric Serra is a really weird composer that I'm not really a huge fan of anyway.
yeah.
He did a lot of Luc Besson stuff, The Professional, Fifth Element, and I'm not a huge fan of their scores either. So yeah, I agree with you. It could be better for sure. It's very very up and down. But I did think that his use of the Bond score in the chase was kind of redemptive because I don't know if that scene would have worked as well as it did if we didn't get a triumphant use of that Bond theme. So I kind of enjoyed that, or I enjoyed that aspect of it. But I do agree with you. The score is definitely one of the other weak points of the movie.
So long story short, GoldenEye is an iconic, enjoyable movie that I might be able to pick on a little bit, but it's still a great movie. It's still an upper level Bond movie. It's fun, and it's what a start to Brosnan's run as well. There's definitely some net positives to discuss around it. And on that note, let's go ahead and let's tease the very next episode, which is all Brosnan all the time and ending his run as Bond. GoldenEye was such a hit, it was a big hit, that they doubled down for the next one. They gave it a much bigger budget and made Tomorrow Never Dies. The thing is, like, it's been so long since I've seen Tomorrow Never Dies. It's honestly the one of Brosnan's movies that I remember the least, but what I remember enjoying a decent bit. But maybe not thinking it's as perfect as it could be either.
Yeah, I remember the pre-title sequence pretty well, and I remember Michelle Yao being in it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's one of the few things that I remember. When I think of Tomorrow Never Dies, I remember Michelle Yeoh and I remember Motorcycle Chase, and like that's what I remember about Tomorrow Never Dies. That's about it.
Yeah.
But I will say, for whatever reason, I've always remembered enjoying The World Is Not Enough, and which I put on my list of theoretical top Bond movies um, when we started this whole run. Mention it in my top 7 of Bond movies, and I don't know if it's going to stay there or not. That'll be interesting to rewatch it. I just remember enjoying it a good deal back at the time.
And I'm right there with you on that because I liked it a lot when I when it came out. It was actually the first Bond movie I saw in a theater, because I didn't see Goldeneye in theaters. I didn't see Tomorrow Never Dies in theaters. I don't think. I'm pretty sure World Is Not Enough was the first for me. It was still running. Bond fever was still kind of running high because Goldeneye had been such a hit as a Nintendo 64 game.
Yeah.
And I remembered the reputation of Tomorrow Never Dies being it wasn't as good, and then The World Is Not Enough came out, and it was pretty solid. I remember liking it quite a bit. I do think it has one of the better Bond villain. Well, actually, it's kind of a double-edged sword, and I'm not going to go any further than that. But in both instances, there's a really good dynamic villain in World Is Not Enough that I would be willing to say lands close to the top 7 villains. It's really interesting dynamic of the characters that you would put in the villain category in that movie, but we'll have to wait until we watch and review it. The next movie I have far more memories of and far less pleasant.
Yeah.
Die Another Day, which
Yeah.
we have collectively agreed on several occasions is not only the worst Bond movie, which is feels unfair to say while we're trying to give these clean shot, but it's just an awful and one of the worst movies we've ever seen. I feel like we both agree on that.
Yeah.
I'm not looking forward to watching it again
No.
because I have not seen it more than once. You have, and
I have.
I I commend you for that. I suppose it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to sit through it, but in some ways, I'm looking forward to it just to see and remember if it's as bad as I remember. Because I mean, it's 18 years old now. It's almost been 2 decades since I've seen it, so that's quite a bit of time. But I do know that it's probably no, there's no probably. It's gonna have the lowest rating. That's not even being unfair. It's gonna have the lowest Bond. Is it gonna have 000 out of 007?
Yes.
We will see. So far, we haven't given anything lower than a 003. I can say with confidence that it will be lower than that. But again, we'll see. I'm I don't want to count the chickens before they hatch, so to speak. But I'm pretty sure where this one's gonna land. But part of the fun of this is going back and seeing for yourself. It's so funny. This episode ended on such a high note that the next one is going to end on such a low note. We had, this is our longest episode. We had a lot to say about these movies, particularly about Goldeneye. It's going to be interesting to see how much longer the next one is because I feel like we'll have a lot more to say about the one we hate.
Yeah, maybe.
But, or maybe it'll be very brief. Maybe it'll be 5 minutes of us just saying, yeah, Die Another Day sucked. But I don't know. It's going to be very interesting to see.
Well, what's sad is I could extend this episode by going ahead and telling you all the different things I hate about Die Another Day, just because it's so ingrained in my memory
Right.
that I already know a lot of things I'm going to say, and I'm probably going to find new things to say when we watch it anew. But that's just the way that rolls. I just had to stop myself from talking now, basically, because there's so much that I want to rip apart already.
Right.
In Dad. I will say this though too, to skip away from our hatred for a moment, is that I didn't mention this earlier. I might have mentioned it in our first episode. I can't remember. But Goldeneye is the first Bond movie that I saw in theaters, and I was 11 years old. So that was one great start to And I don't think it was the first Bond movie I ever saw, but seeing Bond movies in a theater is what a great start.
Seeing a theater, yeah.
And being 11 years old, it was awesome. So I know, obviously we're not too far away in our ages, so like that being the Bond era of our youth, it's a good thing. Thank God I wasn't 11 and seeing Bond for the first time in theaters for Die Another Day.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm glad I got to see The World Is Not Enough in a theater before I saw that in a theater. Um, I got to I got to experience a decent at least entry with Brosnan. But yes, we got to interest. I actually am excited to watch the next two.
I am too. And that's what's fun is like this episode, yeah. It's gonna be fun to like see where they fall exactly because I remember them well or fondly, but it'll be interesting to see exactly where they land. And then it'll be fun in a way to like rip Die Another Day a new one. So
Right.
well, I guess that's all she wrote for now. Drew, my friend, thank you
My pleasure.
for being along for the ride as always. And we'll be back here in Movie Marathon Mood for the close of the Brosnan era. So stay tuned. Thanks for listening.